I've made it no secret in the past that I'm a huge fan of the horror genre. Whether it's the interesting stories told within or the rush of adrenaline you get from the scares, I love engaging with the genre in all forms, be it books, games, movies, etc. And within these stories are characters that people would love to see fight other characters. Sometimes big studios will listen and provide official crossovers like with Freddy vs. Jason, but most often these characters get requested for Death Battle to use, even though the amount of horror episodes they've actually done is minimal. Granted, they have done horror-themed episodes before, like with John vs. Sabretooth and Dio vs. Alucard, but full-on episodes with horror characters are scarce, with only a handful of exceptions. Thankfully, they seem to be showing more interest as of late, especially with the more recent episodes, and both Slenderman and Springtrap being featured in Champions Island, and I'm hopeful for more horror icons getting their own episodes in the future. So to celebrate Spooky Month and drive home the message of more horror and verses, I'm here to share my 10 favorite horror matchups and why I like them so much. Before we get started, allow me to outline the rules of the video. Rule number 1, both characters need to be either horror/horror adjacent or have come from horror/horror adjacent media. Seems pretty self-explanatory, but you may be wondering what I mean by horror adjacent. Well, I define that as any media that prominently features elements of horror and genuine attempts to scare you, so long as they aren't overshadowed by contradictory elements like comedy or action. For example, The Walking Dead is typically seen as a character-focused drama, but the world is still a zombie apocalypse with genuine moments of disgust and terror. Whereas something like Lollipop Chainsaw is way too focused on action, crude comedy, and acid trips for the zombie apocalypse aspect to have any weight in horror. Also, whether or not they come from horror media despite not being horror-themed, or are horror-themed but don't come from horror media, will be factored into the list too. For example, Leon vs. Frank counts as horror because both come from horror/horror adjacent media despite the characters themselves not being horror-themed. Inversely, Shigaraki vs. Mahito counts as horror because the characters themselves are horror-themed despite their media not being so. Though you could certainly make an argument for Jujutsu Kaisen. So sorry to disappoint all the Luigi vs. Pac-Man, Toru vs. SCP-096, and Springtrap vs. Junko fans out there, but your matchups don't qualify for this list. It's not that I don't like them, they just don't meet the criteria for the video. Rule number 2, I can only pick one character per franchise. Like with the indie game matchups video, I want to represent as many horror IPs as possible in this video, so I'm limiting myself to only one character per franchise, with the exception of any characters from Stephen King's book universe and creepypastas. Since the latter is more or less just a collage of different mythos rather than a conjoined universe, any character from there would more or less be representative of their own stories within creepypasta rather than creepypasta as a whole. And while the former is technically a conjoined universe, only a handful of Stephen King's books actually connect to each other, while the rest kinda just exist as self-contained stories. This wouldn't apply to franchises like Silent Hill or the SCP Foundation, since the multiple stories in both exist in the same universe, and directly acknowledge the events of all the stories, but for Stephen King and creepypasta specifically, I will grant them some leeway. And finally, rule number 3. This is just my opinion. I haven't experienced every piece of horror media out there, nor do I enjoy all of them. So please keep that in mind in case I don't acknowledge a piece of horror media you like. I probably just don't know about it or don't personally care for it. There's no need to get up in arms about it. Also, like with the indie game matchups video, I'll continue to add a potential song title at the end of each segment.
But this time in a spooky voice just like this.
Just to keep with the Halloween festivities. Now with all that said and done, it's time to unveil my 10 favorite horror matchups and get them ranked.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi fucking ho. Hello, Papa. How long's it been?
Chucky from Child's Play versus Slappy from Goosebumps. Two children's dolls that seem unassuming at first, but hide sinister spirits within that are sure to put you 6 feet under. Gonna be honest, this is a matchup where I like one and hate the other, and I'm sure you can guess which is which. While I haven't read any of the Goosebumps books, I did see the live-action movies, and they were really fun. And Slappy stole the whole thing in both. He's one of those villains that's simultaneously funny and menacing as a threat, and you guys know how much I love those kinds of villains. Meanwhile, Chucky just plain sucks. Like, I'm sorry to all the Chucky fans watching this, but I am not on your side at all on this. I begrudgingly watched all 8 of his movies, and I only have mild tolerance for 2 of them. If Chucky has haters, I'm one of them, and if Chucky has no haters, I'm dead. But putting that aside, what are these demented dolls capable of? Well, they're pretty much opposites in terms of fighting. Chucky is a physical fighter with his knife and whatever else he can get his hands on, with some voodoo stuff on the side like possession, replicating his soul, and voodoo dolls that he only uses once for some reason. Slappy, meanwhile, has very little physical showings aside from cracking a car windshield, but he does have a wide variety of magic spells he can use, such as teleportation, telekinesis, bringing objects to life, and so much more. Both also kind of have armies they can summon, such as Chucky's multiple good guys all inhabited by him, and Slappy's Halloween costumes transformed into real monsters by his magic. Neither of these are really necessary, but it would certainly make for a fun, chaotic fight. For the setup, I'm going to be taking a different approach to really set the atmosphere for each one of these spooky matchups. For this one, we open on a dark, stormy night. A child is running for their life as we hear cackling laughter in the background. Slappy is having a ball tormenting this young kid with his powers. But unbeknownst to him, one of the kid's toys is stuck away in the chaos. Then he hears a shuffle and rotates his head, scanning the room. He isn't able to see anything at first, but when he turns around...
Hi, I'm Chucky, wanna play?
Turns out, this kid was Chucky's next victim, and he's not about to let Slappy steal away his prey. Now, I've seen a couple people suggest to use live-action puppets for this fight, but that would require a bigger budget than Death Battle likely has. So I would rather they go with 3D models instead. There's plenty of Goosebumps games out there, and Chucky was in Dead by Daylight, so that takes care of the models. Needless to say, the interactions would make this fight pretty fun. I'd love to see Chucky punch Slappy so hard that his head spins around a bunch, and I love to see Slappy send Chucky flying with his telekinesis, whether by throwing Chucky himself or hitting him with something. And of course, the banter would be great. Chucky would of course be his confident, vulgar self at first, but as the fight goes on, he gets more and more pissed off and just unloads every swear in the book. Slappy, I imagine, would be initially appalled by Chucky's vulgarity, but eventually he'd start taunting and criticizing Chucky for his lack of subtlety. I'd especially love it if Chucky insulted Slappy by calling him a dummy, and Slappy dropped his iconic, "Who you callin' a dummy?" in response. Now, the winner seems to be a big part of why some folks don't care for this fight. They seem to think it's a landslide in Slappy's favor, but I think it's closer than they think. Chucky is obviously the superior physical fighter, and while he can be ripped apart fairly easily, he's still resilient as all hell, especially in Child's Play 2. I have seen this one comic where he survived being blasted into a wall by a shotgun, but that doesn't seem very consistent with the movies and the show. Still, he's tougher than Slappy, who can be shattered without much effort, so if Chucky got his hands on Slappy, he could do some damage. Problem is, Slappy's magic is more than enough to keep Chucky at bay. In fact, he's got a few spells that could kill Chucky instantly, such as transmutation or blowing him up. But he does need to recite an incantation to pull those off, which could give Chucky an opening. Chucky is fairly speedy, being able to outrun an explosion for a little bit, but Slappy can just teleport away from him, so I doubt Chucky would catch him for long. Also, his voodoo is very overhyped. Obviously, he's not going to have a voodoo doll of Slappy without prep time, and he needs Slappy to be in a vulnerable position to transfer his soul, which likely wouldn't happen unless Slappy faked it. Plus, said transference takes a bit of time to activate, and if we include the armies in the discussion, then it becomes as one-sided as people say. The sheer variety of monsters Slappy has at his disposal would easily overwhelm Chucky's army of himself, and it'd probably take all of them just to take down one of these monsters, let alone all of them. So yeah, while it's more debatable than people make it out to be, Slappy takes it in the end. And hey, it'd still be fun to see these two demented dolls go at it. Though I guess if you said that to either of them, the response you'd probably get is...
Who you calling a doll?
You try living in a book for a while, Papa.
Xenomorphs from Alien vs. Death Angels from A Quiet Place. Two alien creatures that are virtually unstoppable in their worlds and threaten to destroy all of humanity. Admittedly, this one is made purely out of personal bias for both franchises. While it has its rough spots, the Alien franchise is one that I greatly enjoy, especially the game Alien Isolation, and I absolutely love A Quiet Place. The stories and characters in that world have been consistently great throughout all the movies and the recent video game. Granted, there isn't much connective tissue beyond just terrifying alien creatures, creatures, but the other options I've seen for the Xenomorph don't interest me personally. While Necromorphs have solid connections, I haven't played enough Dead Space games to really be invested in them, and the Demogorgon from Stranger Things just doesn't work. Like, using every type of Xenomorph and every type of Demogorgon results in a landslide victory for the Xenomorph, and a 1v1 wouldn't be much better. The basic drone, while iconic, is far from the strongest Xenomorph, and a peak Xenomorph would shred the Demogorgon like tissue paper. Sorry to all the fans of that matchup, but I am not one of you. Anyways, these creatures are quite unique in what they're capable of. The Xenomorphs had their early stages with the iconic Facehugger, Chestburster, and Drone, you know, shark tail and claws, acid blood, the like, but there are a lot more types than just that. Drones can evolve into Praetorians, of which there are many types such as super regenerative and acidic variants, and act as guardsmen for their queen. Said queen is much bigger than the average drone, and it has further evolutions like the Empress, which can fly, and the Queen Mother, which is even stronger and has telepathic powers. But all these pale in comparison to the King Xenomorph. While very rarely seen, King Xenomorphs are the largest and toughest Xenomorphs that exists, and it's entirely built for combat purposes to the point where entire groups of Yautja, the guys from the Predator franchise, have died taking on just one king. The Death Angels, meanwhile, don't have nearly the same amount of types the Xenomorphs do, but they're still deadly all the same. The standard Death Angel is extremely agile and fast, and strong enough to tear through the side of a train, and while they are blind, their hearing is excellent to the point where the whole world has to go borderline silent in order to survive. Plus, the armor coating them is extremely tough to where they could survive the impact of landing on the planet and tank most types of artillery. The only weaknesses being high-pitched sounds can disorient and leave their soft insides vulnerable to attack, and their bodies are so dense that they can't swim. There also appears to be a Queen Death Angel, but aside from its size, we know nothing of its capabilities and stats. As for the setup, our fight starts on an alien planet. Citizens are running for their lives as Xenomorphs are in hot pursuit. But while this is going on, meteors begin to fall from the sky. The sounds of the crashes draws the Xenomorphs' attention, and they run to investigate. From the wreckage emerges the Death Angels, crashed here just like on Earth. And within seconds of hearing the Xenomorphs' communication, they charge, ready to rip them apart, prompting the Xenomorphs to fight back to protect their hive. This is another fight that should be 3D. While it being a lot to manage, both have readily available 3D models, and it'd be easier and more fitting than hand-drawn or 2D sprites. Since both these aliens don't talk, I think having their body language and shrieks be their method of conveying the story would be best. And I'd like for there to be an emphasis on the different behaviors between the two species, since Xenomorphs are much more intelligent and stealthy, while Death Angels just attack whatever they hear. Now this is another case of people not liking the matchup due to the verdict. A ton of people assume this is a stomp in favor of the Death Angels due to their impenetrable armor. However, I'm actually on the side of the Xenomorphs here. The Death Angels' armor is really tough, sure, but that's really the only thing in their favor. Regular drones are able to scrap with Yautja, who are arguably as strong as Death Angels, and every Xenomorph class above the drone only gets stronger from there. Plus, they're far more intelligent, being able to communicate and even strategize with each other to some degree, while Death Angels just kind of react to stuff, with any form of communication being minimal at best. And in Alien Earth, the Xenomorphs are shown to communicate at incredibly high frequencies, so much so that humans can't even hear it. So I believe it's entirely possible they could figure out and capitalize on the Death Angel's weakness to high-pitched sounds. Not to mention the acid blood could do some major damage if they aren't careful. Sure, with enough brute force, the Death Angels might be able to take down the Xenomorphs, but I think it's unlikely they'd be able to overpower the higher Xenomorph variants, even if we include the Queen Death Angel in all its vague glory. Maybe I'm totally off my rocker with this one, but whichever species comes out on top, there's one thing we always gotta remember with both monsters.
Don't let them hear you scream.
You remember me? Yeah. You remember me.
Okay, now don't do anything stupid. 'Cause I'm not as nice as you. I won't hesitate.
Ellie from The Last of Us versus Clementine from Telltale's The Walking Dead. Two survivors of the zombie apocalypse that were taken in at a young age by father figures after their real parents died, and they took the skills they learned to become the hardened survivors they were raised to be. Something I especially love about this matchup is how their mindsets and storylines contrast one another. Throughout The Last of Us, Ellie suffers from monophobia, the fear of being alone, and is constantly looking for kinship in other survivors, but by the end of her story, she ends up by herself, having lost everything, with the only option left being to keep moving forward. Clementine, on the other hand, has the opposite mentality. She grew up to believe that it's better to be alone and that others will only drag you down in the end. But eventually, she finds not only a home to raise her adopted son AJ, but a group of survivors she can call family, living a happy life in the end.
The actual end.
Of course, there's going to be people in the comments trying to say that neither of these series are horror, but frankly, they're just wrong. While they are more focused on the drama between their central characters, the worlds of these games are not only horror-centric, but there are multiple instances in both series that are designed to unnerve and even disgust you. Whether or not you're personally scared by them is an entirely subjective matter. However, there is a vocal bunch that has a bit of a different problem with this matchup. Some believe that this shouldn't happen because of how these characters are written, believing that they shouldn't be forced to kill each other. And while I can absolutely understand where they're coming from, I believe Ellie and Clem are more than capable fighters in their own regard. Obviously, we're not using the little kid versions of these two, that's wrong on so many levels, but given all they've gone through and where they are now at their peak, a fight between these two would just be an average Tuesday in The Last of Us and The Walking Dead. So what do these two have at their disposal? Well, starting with Ellie, she's got all manner of guns, melee weapons, bows and arrows, her trusty switchblade, and can even craft stuff on the fly like bombs and Molotov cocktails. She's quick enough to dodge arrows, can box with many of the infected and survivors, though some like Abby can prove to be too much for her, and tough enough to survive being shot by arrows and even impaled on a tree branch. She's also got immunity to the cordyceps virus as a whole, meaning spores and infected bites don't mean a thing to her, so long as she isn't totally ripped to shreds. Clementine, meanwhile, has her own array of guns, bows and arrows, knives, and can pick up just about anything lying around to bash someone's head in. She's strong enough to knock people out in only 2 punches, chop someone's arm off in only 2 swings of a hatchet, and backhand a walker so hard it dies, while her hand was stuck in a car door no less. She's kept up with people who can dodge gunfire and even dodged a few shots herself, and is remarkably tough, being able to sew up her own arm without passing out, survive freezing water for almost a full minute, and tank an explosion with it only knocking her out for a bit. She may not be immune like Ellie is, but she's great at utilizing the walker hordes to her advantage, like smearing herself in walker guts, throwing objects to distract walkers, and taking them out efficiently when need be. As for the setup, we open in the middle of a ruined city. Clementine is searching inside a building for useful supplies, and eventually finds some good stuff inside a cabinet. But she quickly hears a voice behind her, telling her to put up her hands and turn around slowly. It's Ellie, with a gun pointed straight at Clem's head. She questions Clem on what she found, and Clem can answer her a few different ways, all of which inevitably lead to Ellie demanding that she hand them over. Clem needs this stuff just as much for her group as Ellie does hers, so it's a fight. The animation would probably work best as 3D again. Expect that to be a pattern for most of these. And while live action would also work, I doubt Death Battle has the budget for that, especially if they want to work in the walkers and the infected. Speaking of which, while the major focus should be on Ellie and Clem trading blows, shooting each other from across the map, and going hand to hand, I also want an extended sequence that involves both the walkers and infected. The initial burst of infected would come first since they're much faster, and I want Ellie and Clem to fight off the infected while still trading blows with each other. Think less Chief versus Slayer and more Leon versus Frank. Then the slower but much larger horde of walkers comes in and spices things up, giving Clementine the chance to smear herself in walker guts and get the jump on Ellie while she's distracted by the horde. But what I especially want to see is a QTE knife fight at the end. Both characters thoroughly exhausted and down to their bare essentials, and QTE prawns from both games appearing to signify their strikes. As for who wins, it's pretty interesting. Ellie definitely takes versatility in weapons, and they might seem pretty even physically at first. However, Clem's feats are more impressive due to the fact that she's done all that she has throughout her teenage years. Clem by now is around 16 years old and has done all that she has at that age and younger. Meanwhile, Ellie is around 19 to 21, and while she's an impressive fighter in her own right, Clem's just done far more at far younger. Sure, you might think the infected are more dangerous than the walkers, which they are, but Ellie has only dealt with groups of 5 or 6 with help on her side and is incredibly reliant on her immunity to the cordyceps virus to get through. Clem has taken on and navigated whole hordes of walkers and knows how to utilize them far better than Ellie has with the infected. And let's be frank here, Ellie is an emotional train wreck, justifiably so given all she's been through, but this has hampered her survival skills on more than one occasion. When she's not blinded by loss, grief, and anger, she's reckless and arrogant when dealing with infected and survivors alike. Were she not immune, I'm confident that she would have died at multiple points. Clementine doesn't have the luxury of being immune, and as a result of that, the guidance she gained from Lee and experience out in the wild, she's always kept a level head, never letting her emotions get the better of her in heated situations. She's calm, collected, and makes tough decisions when it's called for without hesitation. This kind of thing might not matter much for a lot of fights, but in the zombie apocalypse, how you approach every situation is integral to your survival. So with all this said, I think Clementine's going to be the winner of this fight. It wouldn't be easy for either side, but at the end of the day, only the physically and mentally fittest will survive. though it's gonna be sad to say goodbye
To our darling Firefly.
You made it so I can. So, thank you. For everything.
You're welcome for everything.
Little fake.
Chris Walker from Outlast versus Pyramid Head from Silent Hill. Two iconic stalker enemies that haunt the player character throughout the entire game and share a bloody, grungy aesthetic in different ways. This is another matchup that's made mostly out of my own bias for each franchise. The Outlast games are games that I really enjoy playing, and Chris Walker is easily one of the scariest enemies in the franchise. While I am more of a casual fan of Silent Hill as a whole, Pyramid Head is easily the coolest and most threatening monster I've seen in this franchise so far. But there is a bit of an issue with using Pyramid Head in verses. His lore as James' personal demon within the town of Silent Hill makes it so that anyone who can't enter the town while James is there can't interact with Pyramid Head, and that has made people skeptical with using him in verses. Luckily for them, Chris is a fairly easy character to get into Silent Hill, and there's ample proof within the games that characters can see the same things as others, just through a different lens. Besides, it's better than Pyramid Head's other options, which consist of Nemesis, which would never work, and the Keeper, which makes sense thematically, but would be a headache to even get the fight started. And Chris kind of falls in a similar boat, with his options being other random stalker enemies, and Springtrap, who gets pit against all of fiction because reasons. With that said, what are they capable of? Well, not too much, but enough for what their roles demand of them. Before being subjected to Murkoff's experiments, Chris could occasionally pick up objects to bash people, and he mentions that he was taught judo during his military days. After the experiments, he's much more violent and aggressive with his strength, casually tearing off people's heads with his bare hands, backhanding someone so hard they go flying, and breaking down any door in just 3 hits, even if they're steel reinforced doors, which can withstand up to 1,000 pounds of force. He's got heightened senses that allow him to see in the dark, and he's tough enough to survive jumping out of a 2-story window, being shot in the mouth and then hit by a car, and being tossed around by the Wall Rider, though only briefly. Pyramid Head, meanwhile, is around the same ballpark. He's strong enough to throw James through the floor and smash down stone walls with ease, and he's tough enough to tank multiple rounds of ammunition and keep on coming. Also, he's got a couple weapons at his disposal, like his trusty spear, which he can swing around, stab, and throw at people, and we can't forget the ever-iconic Great Knife, aka a giant f***off sword. Definitely don't want to get hit by that. But now it's time for our setup, the thing Silent Hill fans will complain about if not done properly. So, here we go. We open in the town of Silent Hill. James is seen in the rusty otherworld trying to find his way out, but we quickly cut to a different perspective. The walls look much different, and there's a bright green filter over everything. James then rounds a corner and bumps into Chris Walker, who's been called to Silent Hill due to his crimes at Mount Massive. From his perspective, James looks like one of the other inmates, so he grabs James to rip his head off. Luckily, Pyramid Head strolls around the corner, which gets Chris's attention, but he doesn't see Pyramid Head. He sees Miles, the protagonist of Outlast, and the one he worked so hard to kill, but failed at every turn. So he tosses James aside and mutters, "Little pig, you would escape this time, little pig," before rushing Pyramid Head, which starts our fight. Yet again, 3D works best as the animation for the fights, but I definitely want it to be much slower paced given the characters. None of that wild swinging in Jason vs. Michael. I want to feel the weight and impact of their hits in this one. I'd imagine it'd start out with them just going hand to hand, maybe with Pyramid Head grabbing nearby enemies to smack Chris with them, but eventually Pyramid Head would bring out his spear, which is where things would get crazy. I love to see Chris break down nearby doors to use his shields against the spear, and I love to see Pyramid Head disappear into the darkness to try to get the jump on Chris, only for it to fail due to Chris's heightened senses. Of course, the finale would have to involve Pyramid Head finally getting the Great Knife, and if it takes place in the arena from Silent Hill 2 Remake, Chris could use the nearby boxes to combat against it. I'd especially love to see Pyramid Head attempt to bring down the Great Knife, only for Chris to catch it with his bare hands and initiate a struggle. If Chris ends up winning, the death would obviously have to be Chris tearing off Pyramid Head's head. But if Pyramid Head wins, I think it'd be awesome for Chris's otherworld to bleed into James right at the end and allow him to see what he's actually been fighting all this time right before he dies. Speaking of which, I'm pretty confident in saying that this is a Pyramid Head victory. We're obviously not having 2 Pyramid Heads like at the end of the game, that wouldn't be very fair, but even solo, Pyramid Head seems to edge out in strength if only slightly. Speed and intelligence likely wouldn't matter in this kind of fight, though Chris would get both if they did, and Pyramid Head's just too tough for Chris to do any lasting damage to him. Even if you don't take into account his true nature of only being able to die when James proves he doesn't need him anymore, Pyramid Head could take round after round from pistols, shotguns, and rifles and keep on coming, with little visible damage. And for as tough as Chris is, he does have a limit to how much punishment he can take. He's certainly not surviving a good swing from the Great Knife, that's for sure. So in a war of attrition, I think Pyramid Head's gonna outlast Chris, and the death that follows is sure to be
An execution in silence.
Nemesis from Resident Evil versus Subject Delta from BioShock. Two humanoid monsters made by evil corporations and initially made for hunting and killing, but only one followed through with that mission while the other became a protector and hero. I don't talk about it nearly enough, but I'm a big fan of Resident Evil. I really like playing these games, though I'm more familiar with the modern titles, and Nemesis is of course the most iconic monster the franchise has ever had. I also recently played BioShock 1 and 2, and I totally see the appeal of them. Subject Delta in particular is a great character despite him never talking, and I enjoy playing as him and experiencing his journey from start to finish. Of course, I am going to get the usual suspects saying, BioShock isn't horror, to which I will correct them. One BioShock game isn't horror. The other two at least fall under horror adjacent. The concept of being trapped miles under the ocean in a city filled with dangerous freaks and machines is inherently a scary concept. And don't tell me you weren't shaking in your boots the moment the Big Daddy showed up. Those guys would freak anyone out. Now then, what can these monsters do? Well, Nemesis is a unique tyrant that can handle different weaponry, like a flamethrower and a rocket launcher, and he's got tentacles that he can use to swipe, grab, and impale his victims, and parasites he can use to infect nearby people and zombies to send after his victims. He's strong enough to casually shatter walls, quick enough to tag characters that can dodge rockets and even catch rockets mid-air, and tough enough to tank pretty much anything you could throw at him. Like, this dude eats explosions for breakfast, and even when you manage to hurt him for a bit, he can mutate and evolve into stronger forms, whether that's even more tentacles and an animal-like mass of flesh in the original Resident Evil 3, or a semi-aquatic feral beast and a kaiju in the remake. Subject Delta, meanwhile, has quite the arsenal of abilities. He's got his trusty drill, a machine gun, a hacking tool, and a bunch of other guns with various ammo and firepower. And he's got a ton of different plasmas that allow him to control electricity, fire, ice, etc., and give him other abilities like hypnotizing enemies to fight for him, grab and throw objects with telekinesis, and in terms of feats, he's strong enough to smash through walls and take on other Big Daddies and the much more advanced Big Sisters, fast enough to catch rockets with telekinesis, and tough enough to tank them outright, as well as other artillery, and a giant wall of water crashing onto him. Oh, and thanks to him being a walking diving suit, he can survive underwater indefinitely, though it does limit what weapons he can use. As for our setup, this one will be interesting since both characters are largely set in completely different areas, but unlike Pyramid Head, one isn't too tied to the other to where it's tricky to make it work. For this one, we'll open in the City of Rapture. Nemesis is tearing through splicers left and right, and Umbrella scientists are monitoring him, remarking that the test seems to be going well. Eventually, he corners a little sister and raises his foot to crush her. She screams in terror, and at the last second, Subject Delta bursts in and knocks Nemesis aside, ready to tear him apart in defense of his little sister. You can even have Augustus Sinclair in radio contact with Delta to advise him on how to approach Nemesis, and yet again, this fight should be 3D. It just fits best for both. At first, the fight would be an all-out slugfest between the two, Nemesis throwing hands and our objects, and Delta throwing objects and trying to drill Nemesis apart, but then they each bust out their artillery to blast each other to smithereens, while also throwing in tentacles and plasmids. I'd especially love for them to utilize the environment to their advantage. Have Delta hack nearby turrets and cameras to shoot up Nemesis, and have Nemesis infect nearby splicers with his parasites to swarm Delta. Better yet, since this will take place in Rapture, have Delta attempt to drown Nemesis by breaking one of the glass walls and escape into the ocean, only for Nemesis to mutate into the beast to swim after Delta. And of course, we gotta incorporate Nemesis being seemingly killed a few times, only to rise back up and keep on fighting. It's literally what he's known for. As for the winner, it's a surprisingly close fight. Nemesis and Delta are roughly equal in strength and speed, and while Nemesis seems more mobile than Delta, Delta's experience taking on the Big Sisters makes up for that. Apparently there's this feat in the Resident Evil manga where Nemesis boxes with William Birkin so fast that they create a tornado, but that's a pretty big outlier compared to what's consistent in the games. Delta is definitely the more versatile of the two and has more than enough weapons to keep Nemesis at bay, but unfortunately, I don't think any of it's going to be enough to permanently kill Nemesis. As I said, the guy eats explosions for breakfast and keeps on coming, and in the event something actually hurts him, he'll just evolve into something stronger. Delta's pretty tough himself, to be fair, but the best feat he has is barely surviving this big explosion, and only for a little while before dying. Plus, if Nemesis is pushed into turning into the kaiju, Delta's even more screwed. That thing required 3 shots from a railgun before it finally died, and Delta doesn't have anything that powerful on hand. Might be unfortunate for the Subject Delta fans out there, but he'll put up one hell of a fight before he goes down. And a fight of this magnitude will prove who's the most
Unstoppable Bioterror.
Ghostface from Scream versus the Fisherman from I Know What You Did Last Summer. 2 slashers cloaked in black outfits from stories that center around a big mystery as to who they are and why they're doing what they do. This is a pretty big matchup within the horror side of the Versus community, and I completely understand why. The Scream franchise is by far my favorite slasher franchise, and I'm especially enamored by the concept of Ghostface, more than most slashers even. The summer movies, which is what I'll be calling them just so I don't get an aneurysm, while not nearly as good, are still movies I get plenty of enjoyment out of.
-1.
And the Fisherman does a good job of being intimidating and mysterious threat, even after the mask comes off. Though there is a little bit of an issue with using a character like Ghostface in Versus. Unlike most slashers, Ghostface isn't a singular character. He's a costume that multiple people wear across the movies and assume the identity of. And that has led some people to be a little hesitant about applying Versus rules to him. Well, in my opinion, given that most Ghostfaces are generally consistent across all the movies, and the whole idea is that anyone can be Ghostface, I think examining all the movies under a blanket umbrella would work just fine. And we can even apply this to the Fisherman too, since, spoilers for the reboot, instead of being the same guy from the first 2 movies, he's an identity 2 different people assume, basically becoming a Ghostface clone. Even though we already had that earlier this year with Hard Eyes, but I don't write this stuff. Besides, sticking to just one iteration of Ghostface would mean sticking to just the stuff shown in that one movie, which leaves the entire rest of the franchise out to dry. And that's an arbitrary limit that I feel does a disservice to what Ghostface was always meant to be. Not just an individual, but an idea that anyone can be. Now then, what are these slashers capable of? Starting with Ghostface, he mainly sticks to his iconic knife for stabbing and gutting his victims, but he can pick up the occasional pistol or shotgun in a pinch. While they are supposedly just average humans, Ghostfaces are strong enough to break through doors and shatter windows, fast enough to evade a shotgun blast, and tough enough to survive being stabbed and shot multiple times, and even set on fire, yet they're always back up right at the end for one last jump scare. They do tend to be quite clumsy when chasing their victims though. There's always more than one instance of Ghostface getting knocked on his ass. As for the Fisherman, he mainly sticks with the iconic hook for his kills, but he also has access to a spear gun, an ice pick, some fishing traps, and can pick up handy items for kills should he feel like it. He's strong enough to overpower most humans and break through solid wood, stealthy and quick enough to catch most people off guard, and tough enough to survive being hit by a car and getting his hand cut off and chucked into the ocean. These are also average humans, by the way. For our setup, there's a number of ways this can go. I know a lot of people want Ghostface to call up the Fisherman like in the movies, and some have suggested having Ghostface receive the note that says, "I know what you did last summer," among other things. Personally, I'm open to either one as they both fit the vibes of the movies, and I can see Ghostface searching the house in paranoia before getting jumped by the Fisherman, or the Fisherman entertaining Ghostface's antics before Ghostface jump scares him and starts the fight. Either way, this fight deserves to be live action. Circumstances may have prevented Jason vs. Michael being live action, but we can absolutely still do this one in live action. Ghostface costumes are a dime a dozen, and the Fisherman just wears a normal fisherman's attire. The only complication would be invoking the third Summer movie, but we'll get to that later. Right now, I wouldn't be too sure what to expect from this fight. I would definitely like to see Ghostface throw a movie quote or two at the Fisherman, and I would like to see him trip a few times. It wouldn't be Ghostface if he didn't. And if Ghostface ends up winning, we of course need to have a dumb slasher movie reveal of who Ghostface is. I have heard some people suggest having Ben's son be Ghostface, having come back from the dead and seeking revenge on his father for accidentally killing him, but while that is pretty dumb, we can always go dumber. Instead, I would like Ghostface revealed to be Julie, the protagonist of the first two Summer movies, having had enough of Ben's killings and becoming Ghostface to permanently get rid of him. And if you have two Ghostfaces in the fight, you can have the other one be Ray, Julie's boyfriend, giving her a helping hand out of mutual frustration. Yes, I am kinda stealing this idea from the Summer reboot, but better in every single way. Speaking of which, does Ghostface win? Well, unfortunately, that is entirely dependent on whether or not you accept the third Summer movie as canon, and it's the one thing I really hate about this matchup. If you don't accept that movie as canon, and given how the reboot goes, you could make an argument for that, then the fight is pretty standard. Both seem to be around the same ballpark in strength and stealth, with Ghostface having slight advantages in speed, and the Fisherman having more gear and not being nearly as clumsy. The big kicker is that, as I briefly mentioned, there is always more than one Ghostface. With the exception of Scream 3, every Ghostface killer has a partner or two in tow. And for as strong as the Fisherman is in a one-on-one fight, going up against 2 or 3 of them at once would likely be too much for him. So yeah, while it wouldn't be easy for either one, Ghostface would win in this situation. However, if you do accept the third Summer movie as canon, then the Fisherman gets Jasoned into an immortal zombie that can only be killed by his own hook. No, seriously, they did everything they could to kill him, including shoving him into a wood chipper, and he still came back perfectly fine. Not right away in the wood chipper's case, but he still came back. So now you see my problem. Even with their slight advantages, neither Ghostface would really have a counter to that. And with how questionably canon the third Summer film is, whether or not you include it is anyone's guess, which turns the debate from who do you think wins to who do you want to win. Now, I have heard some people argue very hard that 2 Ghostfaces would still win, even with Zombie Fisherman, but despite their insistence, I'm not convinced. Their main arguments boil down to Ghostfaces being very knowledgeable in a lot of different horror movies, which to them means they've seen every Summer movie, and that coupled with their slight advantages, leads them to believe that the 2 Ghostfaces could wrench the hook away from the Fisherman and slit his throat. Problem. Not only do Ghostfaces get very irrational when things don't go their way, and getting the bombshell that their next victim is a zombie would certainly do that, but I feel like saying that their knowledge of horror movies includes all the Summer movies by default is a stretch, considering they mostly just reference the popular ones like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, I know What You Did Last Summer was name-dropped in one of the movies, but it was only a passing mention of the first movie. The other 2 are never acknowledged in any capacity, so unless you gave the Ghostfaces very specific knowledge of a very specific movie, which really just proves my point about the debate being who do you want to win, the best case scenario I can see for including Zombie Fisherman is the Ghostfaces repeatedly stabbing him and getting nowhere until eventually getting tired and dying as a result. Unless you take the chaotic evil approach and invoke crossover scaling for Ghostface, because who cares about vibes or consistency or sticking to the canon? Give him Mortal Kombat 1, give him Call of Duty, give him Dead by... Oh wait, you can't give him Dead by Daylight. Well, Mortal Kombat 1 and Call of Duty are still on the table. And hey, the Fisherman was added to Call of Duty too, so both would at least get that. Obviously, this route would never be taken, but it would certainly be funny to think about. In all seriousness, I still like the idea of this matchup happening someday, and so long as the third Summer movie is left in the garbage where it belongs, Ghostface will nab his kill.
Hook, line, and slasher.
It's an honor.
She broke my arm! My arm! Go.
Carrie from Stephen King's Carrie versus Eleven from Stranger Things. 2 telekinetic teenagers who were raised by a terrible parent, Carrie by her mother and Eleven by her father, and whose most iconic look is being covered in blood in some way. Carrie obviously being drenched in pig's blood, and 11 having her bleeding nose. While it isn't quite as popular as other horror matchups on this list, I like this one quite a bit. I watched the original and remake of the Carrie movies before reading the original novel, and I like each one in its own right. They're not amazing or anything, but still enjoyable, and you can't help but feel bad for Carrie with how she's treated by her mother and the town at large. Stranger Things, meanwhile, is a show I absolutely love. The characters are endearing, the horror is wonderfully executed, and Eleven herself is a great lead for the show. Definitely excited to see how it ends later this year. What's especially interesting about this matchup is how Carrie and Eleven contrast each other. Both go through messed up things during their life, but Carrie didn't really have anyone to help her through it. She had a couple people that seemed to pity her, but nobody in the town truly loved or even liked her, not even her own mother. So she lashed out against everybody, killing multiple people at the school and most of the town in the novel, until finally meeting her end, whether by collapsing her own home in the movies or bleeding out in the street in the novel. Eleven, however, found herself a family to lean on, good friends like Max, a boyfriend in Mike, and a new father in Hopper. Sure, she was still bullied and raised terribly, but thanks to her friends and family, she pushed past it and became a good person and a protector of her home. So this is both original versus inspiration, as Stranger Things was inspired by a lot of Stephen King's work, but also a tragic victim versus a triumphant hero. Works really well if you ask me. As for what these telekinetic teens can do, their powers are largely what you'd expect, picking up anything nearby and chucking it at their targets, but they have other abilities and strengths unique to them. Carrie can influence any object's movement simply by picturing it in her head, including slowing her mother's heartbeat until it stops, and pull down rocks from the sky in both the novel and the TV movie. Eleven can crush people's organs, snap their necks, and enter their minds to learn their locations and read their memories. And while she initially needed a sensory deprivation tank to do that last one, it seems like she's learned to do it without the need of one, if the season 4 finale is anything to go by. Eleven has also held her own against Vecna, a more powerful telekinetic, and is able to open and close gates to a parallel dimension called the Upside Down, though it does require a great deal of effort from her. Physically speaking, both are what you'd expect from average teenagers, but they can power through some deadly wounds for a while. Carrie especially, since she had a knife embedded in her shoulder during the last hour of her rampage in the novel. To set up the fight, we'll open on the streets of Chamberlain. Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and Will are riding their bikes late one night, with Eleven riding with Mike. But they eventually hear an explosion around the corner. They turn to see the local school ablaze and a blood-soaked girl walk out of the inferno. Carrie has begun her massacre, and she quickly takes notice of the boys and Eleven, who she chucks a nearby fire hydrant at. Eleven promptly brushes the hydrant aside, and despite Mike's concerns, gets off the bike and approaches Carrie, prepared to protect her friends and the rest of the town. The animation itself has me a bit perplexed though. It's hard to imagine a fight like this in anything but live action, but while it wouldn't be too hard to find actors for Carrie and Eleven, I don't know if Death Battle would have the budget necessary for the effects needed for this fight to work. Then again, considering the insane budget Blade vs. Buffy had, I can't fully discount it. If live action is indeed out of the question, I guess 3D would work if models are available. I don't know how this fight would look as sprites are hand-drawn. I will say I would personally like for Eleven's current design to represent her in the fight. I know the shaved head younger version is a more popular version, but the older version allows for more dialogue and more dynamic uses for powers. I can definitely imagine there being a lot of destruction during the fight as they'll both be throwing all manner of items at each other, but I think that Eleven might be more careful of where her objects are flying as opposed to Carrie, who would just be causing carnage willy-nilly. I especially would like to see Eleven pin Carrie down and enter her mind to figure out why she's doing this, and when she learns about Carrie's abuse, her demeanor shifts from hostile to more sympathetic and defensive as she tries to talk Carrie down, to which Carrie likely wouldn't listen as her rampage continues. As for the winner, it's pretty handily in Eleven's favor. While both can do many of the same things as each other, lifting cars, crushing organs, and the like, Eleven packs a lot more power compared to Carrie. Pulling meteors from the sky and collapsing buildings isn't anything to scoff at, but opening and closing gates to the Upside Down is beyond that. Plus, despite being on the back foot for most of it, Eleven actually has experience dealing with other telekinetics like Vecna, compared to Carrie, who massacred normal teens. The one downside is that Eleven can overtax herself if she puts too much effort into her powers, whereas Carrie doesn't seem to have that holding her back. But I doubt Eleven would need to push herself to that extent to take out Carrie, especially since she's gotten a much better handle on that over time. It's kinda sad that Carrie's fated to die even in verses, but Eleven will at least give her a respectful death all the same. Some may think it's cruel to make these teens fight, but anyone who's seen their media will know perfectly well
They're no stranger to blood.
This is God.
Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street versus Pennywise from Stephen King's It. Two child-murdering monsters that draw power from the fear of their victims and can pretty much warp reality to their whims. Besides Jason versus Michael, this is pretty much the top dog of popular horror matchups, and I'm fully behind it. While the movies themselves vary greatly in terms of quality, Freddy Krueger himself never fails to disappoint as the main villain of the franchise. Whether he's over the top and goofy or deeply sinister and malicious, Freddy carries this franchise on his back, and I hope to see him again soon after having no movies for 15 years. Pennywise, meanwhile, can differ depending on which version you look at, whether it's Tim Curry's more jovial yet still menacing take, or Bill Skarsgård's much creepier, more sinister take. Personally, I enjoy watching both for different reasons, and I'm interested to see Skarsgård strut his stuff again in the upcoming Welcome to Derry show. Now, going into their arsenals, it's hard to really give them a set arsenal when they can both pretty much do whatever they want. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. Within the dream world, Freddy has stretched his limbs, grown in size, shape-shifted, warped the world to his liking, among so much else that I'd be here forever. Pennywise does seem to be a bit more limited based on what its victims are afraid of, and being in the real world as opposed to the dream world, but it's still shown an impressive repertoire consisting of transmutation, creating illusions, growing in size, bending the world around it, and its most famous tool, the Deadlights. While in Stephen King's books there's some weird metaphysical manifestation that's both from a higher dimension and is that dimension at the same time, don't quote me on this, I barely understand any of it. In the movies, Pennywise can use these to send people into a comatose state and send their souls directly to its true form in the Macroverse. And said true form is stated to drive people mad just by looking at it and devour your souls, among other things I can't be bothered to understand. Seriously, Stephen King writes good stories, but he's terrible at explaining them. Looking at our fight, obviously it would have to take place in the dream world, and for those wondering if Pennywise can dream at all, it's stated in the original book that all it wants to do is eat, sleep, dream, and eat again. Pennywise even says it dreams in It Chapter 2.
27 years, I dreamt of you.
So with that nugget out of the way, we open seemingly on the streets of Derry, with a child running through the rainy streets. Yep, we're referencing the opening of It with this one, but with a bit of a twist. While Pennywise is having its chat with the child, they suddenly freeze in place and fade away. Across the street, it sees three girls singing an eerie tune. It then hears the sounds of footsteps through water and the scraping of metal along the sewer walls. It turns to its left to see Fred Krueger, and he's not happy with Pennywise. During the past year, while it was awake, many of the kids Freddy was planning to kill were taken by Pennywise as food, and he's not a fan of his prey being snatched away. Of course, Pennywise needs to eat to survive, so it's not going to acquiesce to Freddy's threats. So they fight over control of the town and the kids within. Like with Carrie vs. Eleven, it's hard to imagine this fight in anything but live action, but unlike Carrie vs. Eleven, where that might be possible with the right budget, I know for a fact that they need the budget of a feature film to make this work in live action. So I would probably prefer hand-drawn or 3D. Maybe sprites if you do it right, but I'm not totally sold on that. In any case, there's still a lot you can do with this kind of fight, and I would personally deem it the horror version of endless creativity. Have them both twist and contort their bodies in different ways to attack each other, and have them recreate each other's fears to get the advantage. Have Freddy spawn in a bunch of recreations of the Losers Club to beat up Pennywise, and have Pennywise recreate the fire that killed Freddy in the past. And of course, we need to have Freddy and Pennywise banter with each other. Bring out all the puns for Freddy, and bring out all the playful teases for Pennywise. It'd just be fun. As for who wins, it might be a bit interpretational. The big argument for Pennywise comes from its true form, and the fact that it should be leagued stronger than Freddy and devour his soul. The problem with this argument is that Freddy has plenty of ways to avoid its true form. He should be plenty fast enough to avoid getting caught in the Deadlights, and even if he did get caught in them, Richie could escape its true form by metaphysically biting its metaphysical tongue in the book. So Freddy should be capable of the same thing, with some dapper sunglasses to block out the Deadlights for good measure. And it's not like the true form could drive Freddy mad, since, well, you know, heck, you might even be able to argue that Freddy would survive his soul being eaten since he survived Amanda Krueger devouring his soul. But that might be a bit flimsy since its true form is well beyond Amanda. Still, without that on Pennywise's side, this is pretty handily a Freddy win. The most Pennywise has ever done in its physical form was a mountain-level impact when it first arrived on Earth. And that's nothing compared to the universal god Freddy is shown to be in all his media. Both have major weaknesses, those being the power of belief and being forgotten by the world, but only one of those can be exploited in the fight. While it can affect the minds and memories of people within Derry, figuring out that it needs to wipe out the memory of Freddy and everyone wouldn't be very likely, as opposed to Freddy who's positively overflowing with belief, given his incredible confidence and wit. So all that combined should allow Freddy to pierce its heart and take the win, and Pennywise would be its scared, withering self the whole time. But luckily, we don't need to be too scared of either of these guys, so long as we always remind ourselves,
It's just a nightmare.
I'll see you in hell.
Tell him Freddy sent you.
Sadako from Ringu versus Slender Man from Creepypasta. Two black and white supernatural monsters of the East and West that share a theme of spooky forests and static, and both of their most iconic moments stem from willing someone to die with their minds. We're diving into some weird shit with this one, and lucky for me, it involves characters I really like. While I haven't seen much of the Ringu movies, Sadako as a character is extremely iconic both in and outside of Japan, with some people deeming her their favorite horror character. And while I wouldn't go to that extent, I definitely see why they would, as she's plenty creepy in her own right. Some viewers of the channel are probably aware of my love for Slender Man as a horror icon, but for those who haven't seen the couple times I talked about him, Slender Man is one of my favorite creepypastas ever. The whole concept about this eldritch entity that's human-like in all aspects except the face is just disturbing to me in ways I can't describe, and the lore surrounding him is very intriguing, if very confusing at times. Sure, there are some people that will bring up the more controversial aspects of Slender Man's history as reasons to dislike and prohibit him from verses, but as someone who's able to separate art from real life, I'm still able to enjoy Slender Man for the fictional horror icon that he is, tragic as the events that transpired were. But there is a different problem people have with using Slender Man in verses that we do need to discuss. How do we determine what's canon to his mythos? Is there an actual list of official media, or is there an official storyline made by Victor Surge, Slender Man's creator?
The answer is yes and no.
See, while Slender Man himself is a copyrighted character with copyrighted material to his name, who actually owns this copyright is largely unknown thanks to a certain theatrical film. And while Victor Surge is the creator of the Slender Man character, the canon that he's made with Slender Man is very loose. Yes, Victor Surge did have a string of posts on the Something Awful forum detailing his vision of what Slender Man is and what he's capable of, but he also doesn't seem to care about people actually sticking to it as the definitive canon. Not only did he outright encourage writers within the forum to make their own stories building off of what he had established for Slender Man, with no real restrictions on what could technically be considered canon, but he outright said in the 2011 interview that he believes Slender Man as a concept lends itself to not being pigeonholed into one specific storyline or canon.
I kind of started to realize that, yeah, you have your Slender Man, but they also have something, they have the Operator, which they're similar, but yet the mythos between you and Marble Hornets, it's close, but yet not the exact same.
Right. Plus, Slender Man itself, lends itself to not being, pigeonholed into a certain storyline or canon or anything like that. So
exactly, there's a lot open to interpretation.
Right.
So what does this mean for us figuring out what can and can't be used for Slender Man in verses? Well, in my opinion, I believe this means that Slender Man's canon is more open to interpretation than one might think. Rather than limiting ourselves to just a Something Awful forum and the copyrighted material, we can use that material as a blueprint and take a look at all sorts of different mythos made by passionate fans of Slender Man. Within reason, of course. We're obviously not pulling random fan games, fight animations, or fan films for use. That'd be insane. But whole storylines and mythos like Tribe 12, Everyman Hybrid, and the Jeff vs. Slenderman crossover would be applicable so long as they don't deviate into entirely different characters like Fear Mythos or Marble Hornets. And hey, since we're going this route for Slender Man, we can apply the same method to Sadako's more defined official media. In addition to the films, we can invoke the manga, the original novels, the video games, the crossover films, and even Dead by Daylight while avoiding the American and Korean films since they involve entirely different storylines and characters. Now that we've gotten all that out of the way, what does that give us for both characters? Well, surprisingly, they share a lot of the same powers. Teleportation, tendrils, mind control, illusions, transmutation, plant manipulation, technology manipulation, death manipulation, weather manipulation, and so much else that I'd go insane pairing it all together. But they do have a few of their own abilities, namely sleep manipulation and weird force fields for Sadako, and pyrokinesis and intangibility for Slender Man. In terms of feats, Sadako can rip apart metal doors, fly at hypersonic speeds, react to arrows, and regenerate from being blown to bits. And Slender Man can uproot trees, move fast enough to only appear in one frame of a 3-shot camera burst, and is regenerated from being sliced up by Jeff, and can survive dimensional bleeding apparently. They've also done bigger things like Sadako creating city-level storms, and Slender Man creating town-wide power outages. To set up the fight, we will once again open on a dark, stormy night, at a house in the middle of the woods. The owner is frantically running for their life as Sadako is crawling out of their TV, with it being the 7th day since they watched her tape. But as the chase goes on, the lights begin to flicker, the radio turns to static, and booms are heard in the distance. The owner manages to stumble out the door with Sadako close behind, ready for the kill. But they both stop and turn their attention upwards. The shadow of a man looms over against a flash of lightning, and the very air is filled with a piercing noise. The Slender Man has arrived, and he intends to make this human his next proxy. So he can't have Sadako killing them, which starts their fight. The animation, I feel, works best in a scratchy, hand-drawn style. A lot of Slender Man matchups are requested to be 3D, or even sprites, and both Sadako and Slender Man have 3D models. However, given how insane their powers are, and the specific styles of the respective mythos, I will personally prefer a hand-drawn animation over 3D, even though 3D could work if done well. I would definitely like to see them both use their iconic death manipulation on each other, but since it likely wouldn't work on either one due to their insane power, they would just tilt their heads in confusion. I can definitely see their powers bouncing off each other in cool ways, like Sadako's hair versus Slender Man's tentacles, and both manipulating reality and the environment to their advantage. But one thing I especially think should happen is that for the first half of the fight, Slender Man should not move his body. You can keep the head tilt, but for the most part, I want Slender Man standing completely still with his only movements coming from his tendrils and reality warping. Until Sadako lands a good hit on him and knocks him back. This would cause him to recognize Sadako not as a nuisance or a mere human, but a real threat to him. And so, he properly moves his body and starts trying. Better yet, since both very rarely speak, the kill can involve either one saying one phrase to their opponent right before they obliterate them with one final burst of power. And of course, Sadako's voice should be in Japanese given her background. Speaking of which, who wins this fight is a little tricky to understand. Both share a lot of the same powers, and both seem to be around the same range of subsonic to even hypersonic speeds. Sadako does seem to have superior regeneration and can affect larger areas with her powers, but Slender Man seems physically stronger and just as hard to put down. Where things get really weird and esoteric is when you discuss the true nature of both characters. I'm gonna try to explain this the best way I can, but I don't blame anyone for being weirded out by these. Let's start with Sadako. In the Ringu novels, Sadako is effectively a being made of pure Hertzian energy and resides within the dimension called the Crack in Time. And the real world is actually a virtual reality called the Loop, where time moves much faster and tests are run to a fast-forward evolution by another virtual reality that supersedes it, and so on and so forth until your brain hurts. Sadako, being the resident of the Crack in Time, which supersedes both of these realities, was able to turn the loop cancerous and infect both realities with it, making her essentially a fifth-dimensional entity above the normal concepts of time and space. So if that's Sadako, what the heck is Slender Man? Well, there's many interpretations across multiple mythos, but the most concrete of answers comes from Tribe 12 and the Something Awful Forum. In Tribe 12, one of the Slender Man's proxies is called the Collective, a collection of higher dimensional entities unbound by time and space, residing within a higher dimension called the Boardwalk, which is described to be, and I quote, a three-dimensional shadow cast by our four-dimensional space-time. Make of that what you will, but since the Collective are higher dimensional entities under Slender Man's control, Slender Man would naturally supersede them, which makes him a 5D platonic concept that exists throughout time as a whole. He might look different depending on the time period you find him in, but he is still there as the same creature. This is actually backed up by the Something Awful Forum, where he is described as a metaphysical entity, one whose essence is of the mind and kept alive and powerful by our own knowledge of him. So long as there are people in this world that know and fear him, the Slender Man will always have power, as an immutable concept of our reality that we cannot hope to get rid of. So besides the 5 people that actually understood everything I just said, what does this mean for the winner? Well, Sadako unfortunately doesn't have the means to kill Slender Man. She can affect the minds of individuals, but figuring out that she needs to erase the knowledge of Slender Man from all of humanity, let alone pulling that off, is a little above her pay grade. Meanwhile, Slender Man, thanks to his access to the collective, can easily supersede the Ringu cosmology and erase the crack in time. And him figuring that out is much more plausible considering his natural existence throughout and above the normal concept of space-time. I know this was an incredibly weird one to discuss, and it probably flew over a lot of people's heads, but don't shoot the messenger. I couldn't write this shit if I tried. Either way, the stuff we can understand about both is sure to make for an intense fight of cosmic proportions, and the Eldritch Horror is sure to provide great scares. And believe it or not, researching all this wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. After all,
there's only 7 pages.
Yes, sir, we got another top 10 list with some honorable mentions to share because I just love horror matchups that much. And there are so many more out there that deserve recognition, even if they aren't my absolute favorites or anything. Alma vs. Evelyn, Fear vs. Resident Evil, extremely powerful psychic children, and one's got an army at her beck and call. Ash Williams vs. Frank West, Evil Dead vs. Dead Rising. Definitely a fun option if you want to lean into the campier and crazier side of the zombie apocalypse. Sin vs. Am, Murder Drones vs. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Two of the most evil AI in all of fiction, one destroys planets, the other is a planet. Deacon St. John vs. Daryl Dixon, Days Gone vs. The Walking Dead. Not comfortable with Ellie vs. Clementine? Well, here's another Survivor MU that doesn't have nearly the emotional baggage. Flowey vs. The Princess, Undertale vs. Slay the Princess. An indie game matchup that's also a horror matchup? Sign me up! Necromorphs vs. The Flood, Dead Space vs. Halo. Would definitely be a hassle to animate, but the variety of both alien species would be very cool to learn about. Omori vs. Room, Omori vs. Boisvert. This one definitely needs a delicate hand when examining, but besides that, you can consider this the number 11 of the list. Pinhead vs. The Tall Man, Hellraiser vs. Phantasm. Don't have much experience with either, but from what I've seen, this has potential. Springtrap vs. Goji, Five Nights at Freddy's vs. The Man in the Suit. This is the only good Springtrap MU. Do not at me Springtrap versus insert character here, fans. And lastly, the Scarlet King vs. Zolgo, the SCP Foundation versus Creepypasta. If you ever want to have a painful time understanding complex Eldritch gods, this is the right matchup for you. Alright, people, let's do this one last time. From Undertale vs. Sonic.exe from Creepypasta. Two nightmarish characters commonly referred to as demons that both sport freaky smiles and blood dripping from their eyes. Both have powers connected to souls and the fourth wall, and both have a strong connection to the player or their gains for different reasons. Kara as the result of the player's actions in the genocide route, and EXE is a monster that steals the souls of all who play his game. Can't say you weren't expecting this one to be my number 1, huh? My favorite game versus my favorite creepypasta. I've spoken ad nauseum about how much I love this matchup, and even though I've received a fair amount of criticism for it, said love has never wavered, not even a little bit. I adore this idea to death, and even though it's highly unlikely that this will ever happen thanks to the popularity of Sonic.exe versus Red, I'll still hope that it will someday. And yes, I'm once again going to talk about the deeper theme behind the matchup, which is still so compelling to me. Kara as a character has gone through multiple different perceptions over the years, from the evil mastermind to the innocent victim to somewhere in the middle, which is where I land personally. While they were complacent in your genocide and were influenced into believing that power achieved through violence is good, they still held on to some level of morality, making sure the player faces consequences for their actions and remaining a permanent reminder of the monster you created. The same kind of monster that Sonic.exe is every day. Sure, there might be something more to his killings than pure sadism, but he still very much enjoys his endless carnage, killing more and more people in increasingly brutal ways, and loving every minute of it. Kara and EXE would absolutely hate each other. and the character dynamic that would ensue from that is more alluring than most, if not every other theme I've seen for both. Now you might be wondering how these two can be applied to Versus, since Kara's only canonical appearance is at the end of one route of Undertale, and EXE isn't seen doing a whole lot outside of his brief kill sequences. Well, in my opinion, there are two ways you can go about this. One is to purely stick to what is generally considered canon. Since Kara is the end result of the player's actions in the Genocide route, it stands to reason that they will receive all the gear, stats, and feats obtained throughout said routes. Not necessarily the pacifist or neutral routes, since they have little to no involvement in them outside of sabotaging the soulless pacifist route, but everything Genocide Frisk did, plus the stuff Kara does at the end, would be applicable. Similarly, Sonic.exe does actually have a semi-consistent canon to follow, despite the current co-owner being rather indecisive with what's considered canon. There's multiple stories, lore statements, and games made that's part of this canon, and while you might have to play a little loose with it, combining the old stuff from EXE's original owner with the new stuff from Joe Doughboy, all of that would make for a substantial analysis for Sonic.exe. The other route you can take is more than a little divisive, but given how the genre of creepypasta isn't really conducive to sticking to one particular canon, I feel it fits a bit better to represent EXE. You can take a look at all the different mythos and fan games made with the two, and use the original canon as your blueprint to see what fits and what doesn't. Again, not necessarily random fight animations or one-off stories involving the two, but actual mythos that build their own stories that could reasonably fit within the canon of Undertale and EXE. To give some examples, fanon stuff for Kara would include No More Deals, Azrael Dreamer Reborn, and Season 1 of Glitch Tale, but wouldn't include stuff like most major AUs like Story Shift, Cross Tale, and others. For Sonic.exe, the fanon stuff would include stuff like Torrent's animated trilogy, One Last Round, and even Xenophanes from the FNF mod, which was made in part by all three co-owners of EXE by the way, but wouldn't include stuff like Nightmare Beginnings, Spirits of Hell, and Sonic.eyx. So what does all this give our two combatants? A lot, actually. Sticking to canon, Kara gets all the gear you obtained during the Genocide run, the save and reset file that allows them to try over and over again, their iconic erase attack that seems to obliterate the whole universe of Undertale, and potentially the 6 human souls depending on how you look at how they operate. And within fanon, Kara gets the ability to create knives and use them however they want, multiple souls they've collected from players to use as bombs, some control over the fourth wall, and a hatred form that boosts their stats at the cost of their sanity. As for EXE, within canon, he gets teleportation, flight, transmutation, soul manipulation, mind manipulation, reality warping, fourth wall manipulation, and all the regular abilities as Sonic with some backup from his 7 guardians. And within fanon, these powers are better visualized through more creative transformations, regeneration from wounds, absorbing souls to give himself a power boost, and even sicking souls onto people to attack them. In terms of feats for both, Kara can take on all manner of monsters, dodge lightning and lasers, obliterate and recreate the whole universe, and even take on Azrael Dreamer in their hatred form, albeit with him holding back immensely. EXE, meanwhile, has created a whole universe within the void between dimensions, plans to merge said dimension with ours at some point, can seemingly scale to classic Sonic characters, at least physically, and has shot his own void matter fast enough to travel from the edge of the universe to Earth in a short amount of time. As for the setup, we open within the normal town of Snowdin. A random monster is about to play a game they found at the garbage dump, but they quickly realize that this game holds a dark secret. During this, Frisk has slaughtered their way through Snowdin Forest on a nerd genocide route, with Kara playfully mocking them for going through with this again. But when they arrive in the town, it's not empty as usual. It's drenched in blood and bodies everywhere, as if some creature came through and massacred everyone. And sure enough, they see this creature slaughtering the last monster left and taking their soul. Sonic.exe turns around to see Frisk and Kara and drops his iconic,
"Hello. Do you want to play with me?"
before lunging towards them, which forces Kara to take over Frisk and start the fight. Of course, the animation works best as 2D sprites, but I'd love it if there was a natural evolution to the animation as the fight goes on. Imagine if we start out with simple sprites only for when in Undertale, change to more advanced sprites mixed with hand-drawn when we go to EXE's world, and finish as fully hand-drawn for the climax. Make it as if the characters are breaking the video itself as they fight. The interactions would also be golden. Through dialogue, Kara would be inquisitive about EXE's drive to continue killing, but EXE would be his usual overconfident self during the fight, claiming he doesn't need a reason other than the love of the game. With their powers, we can have Kara be killed multiple times by EXE, reloading their save to try again and again, and getting better at reading his movements. But eventually, towards the climax, EXE would figure out what they're doing, search the files for the save, and destroy it. Before that, however, I'd love to see EXE throw a bunch of projectiles at Kara, only for them to dodge in the black and white style of the Undertale boss fights. And I'd like to see smaller stuff like Kara throwing rapid fire punches with the gloves, only for EXE to block them all with his super speed. Or EXE using his teleportation to get the jump on Kara, only for Kara to deliver a bunch of kicks with the ballet shoes, which confounds EXE. And if you're willing to include them, a finale between Xenophage and Hatred Kara would be so cool as they shatter reality and even call upon the 6 human souls and 7 guardians to assist them in their fights. It'd just be awesome to see. As for the winner, I'm very much on EXE's side with this one. He's much faster and stronger at a base level than Kara, is way more versatile with all of his powers, and would easily be able to overcome the save file with his 4th wall powers. Kara is definitely the more skilled fighter of the two, since EXE is more commonly shown to be rather clumsy at hand-to-hand, and they do have one way they could potentially kill EXE thanks to the erase attack. However, I believe EXE has ways around it. He's more than fast enough to prevent Kara from getting the chance to use it, and could probably use his mind manipulation to stall Kara from using it. Sure, it's based on the amount of evil in a person's heart, but if it could work on a normal kid who just wanted to play a weird game, it could definitely work on Kara. Even if they did get the opportunity to unleash it, given that it seems to be entirely contained to the game world of Undertale when in use, and Kara specifies to erase this pointless world, the farthest it seems to go is universe busting and potentially the alternate timelines of the game. Exiting the void to the real world or even just outrunning the attack to the edge of his universe are both things that EXE could reasonably do, and since the void exists as a space between universes, it's likely the void doesn't abide by the normal concept of space-time, which would mean there wouldn't be any timelines to erase within the void. I almost feel bad for giving my favorite game an L, but I gotta go with what the facts present, and by the end of the brawl between these two horrific 4th wall shattering demons, they'll find that they have
no more souls.
I'm Tony Sonic, and thanks for watching my Halloween special, everybody. Hopefully this one actually releases on Halloween. I am cutting production a little close, but I'll always try to do my best for you guys whenever I make another video. Amidst a couple smaller projects, the next major video will be an ERA of Psychonauts 2. Believe it or not, I've never played this game before now, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. In fact, most have said it's better than the first game by quite a lot, so I hope I can say the same when I'm finished. Only time will tell how I feel in the end, so I'll see you all. Whoa, what the heck is happening?
Oh good, I landed here. I can actually do something about this.
DT? What are you doing here? And why do you look like Shadow?
No time to explain. I gotta get that demon out of you.
Well, wait a second.
No, you no, Mrs. Sorry. There, that should take care of it. You're welcome.
Why?
I thought you told him about our agreements.
I did, but then again he didn't look like this, so I'm guessing this one's from the future or something.
What agreement?
Since my possession last year, the mortal and I have worked out an arrangement. I get to live rent-free in his mind, and he gets a spooky phone to use in scary videos, among other things.
Really?
Yeah, it's contractual and everything. I showed you the contract yesterday.
Huh. Must have forgotten about this. But rest assured, I do have a good reason for doing this.
Which is?
You'll find out soon enough!
Well, that was weird. I guess I'll see you again next year?
Or in that future Resident Evil video you've got planned, sure. And do better to keep your friends in the know. That was a painful exorcism.
Anyways, see you next time, everybody!